I wasn't going to let anyone's judgment affect my future anymore, and I needed to take the power back. And so my journey began. Welcome to Brave Beginnings, growing confidence through conversations. I am your host, Michaela Longdon, and in the future episodes, we're going to be talking to people. I'm going to be inviting guest speakers in to talk about how they have overcome the obstacles in their lives to become the best versions of themselves, and how they have grown their confidence, the things that they have done, the skills that they have learned, the patterns that potentially we can model and copy so that we can also implement them and grow our own confidence through conversations. I'm going to start today with my own journey, and I must admit I feel exposed and I feel vulnerable right now, but I think it's important to share with you why I'm doing this podcast in the first place. So I'll start at the very beginning. I'll start as me as a child, and I was bright ginger hair, big glasses. We grew up on the poverty line, just my mum in a council estate with my sister and my older sister. My dad was an alcoholic and abusive, and he was removed from my life at the age of 3. So I watched men come and go for the majority of my life and felt often that I was a victim of my surroundings. I remember being a child and just wishing that I'd been born into a different family. This feeling that I wasn't enough, and that compared to everybody else, I didn't have a nice home, I didn't have a normal family, I didn't have money. I remember my mum used to count money on the side. We'd have like £30 for the week to buy for food, and I was so ashamed of that, and I hid it from all of my friends at school. But they knew, I was having free school meals and everything, so they knew that I was poor. But it was this whole embarrassment and this whole shame surrounding a lack of money and feeling really separate from everybody else in the world. I thought at the time everybody else in the world who had it easier than me. Obviously that wasn't the case, and there were so many people out there that had a rougher upbringing than me, but I think this is where my limiting beliefs started. And one of the first ones was, yeah, but for you, but maybe not for me, because that's what I grew up with. It was, yeah, for other people, but not for me. I wouldn't be able to go to school trips. We wouldn't go on holidays. I didn't really go out or do anything with my mum because she just didn't have enough money. She also struggled with her own mental health. After the abuse, she had her own anxiety and her own issues. And I think it was my role to bring her up and to raise her spirits. And I became the entertainer and the performer, and which is why I probably became an actress, because I liked putting a smile on her face when I was younger, and it was one of the things that I could do that would shift her state and shift her energy into one that felt lovely to be around. Not that she wasn't, but she was struggling, and I totally understand that looking back. So from a young age, I was bullied and felt often outcast or ostracised due to the working class nature that I grew up in and the appearance of myself. Red hair, big glasses, scrawny. I was often bullied for the way that I looked. I had some great friends who stuck up for me, but I never really stuck up for myself. I never really owned my own voice. I would just put my head down and walk past the people who would bully me in shame. And I think that avoidant behaviour continued up until the age of 15, when I actually got into a fight. Someone punched me by accident. They meant to punch someone else, and I realised that it wasn't the worst thing in the world sticking up for yourself, and once you'd done it, people kind of left you alone. So that was my story growing up. Around the age of 14-15, my mum had got a new husband. He left, and I'd grown up understanding that men came and went, so there was a lack of trust when it came to men in particular, I would say, and further insecurities developed. So I was often very distrusting towards the people that I dated, or in general, always thinking that someone would hurt me. And I think that made me tread very carefully. It created a sense of ego. And yeah, I think that stopped me from showing people who I really was for a very long time, for fear that they would judge or ridicule me. And that didn't actually fall, that ego, that mask didn't fall until my later years. So as I got older, and you would hope wiser, this mask and this ego, I wore it, and it really hid a lot of insecurities of why I felt I was inferior. And whilst in some ways I think a lot of you can relate to that, what I didn't realise was about to happen was around my mid-20s, I was about to get into an abusive relationship that would shake everything up. I watched my mum go through abuse. I heard my mum go through abuse, and I promised myself that I would never do the same. But ultimately, the way that I felt about myself, my low self-esteem, my insecurities, made it such that I fell victim. I don't like to use the word victim because I don't see myself as a victim, but I fell into an abusive relationship, and that changed everything. I managed to leave the relationship, but I didn't really understand what had happened until I left. When I left, I had insomnia. I wasn't sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night. I had depression, anxiety. I was using drugs and drink and whatever I could to distract, bury, which had worked mostly in my life. That's what I'd done. I'd always distracted. I'd never really accepted my insecurities. I'd never really accepted the trauma from the past. I'd buried it, and you just get on. But it still lingered to the point that it did affect my self-esteem, and it did affect my self-worth, and it compromised my ability to see the red flags in this particular relationship right at the start that were there. Once the relationship was over and I was going through a lot of PTSD symptoms, I realised that I didn't know the full story of what had happened in that relationship. And I remember researching, and this was a significant point, I researched signs you've been gaslit. And out of 50 of those signs that you've been gaslit, I think I ticked around 48. And I just broke down because I realised what had happened. I knew that something wasn't right in the relationship. I knew that every single instinct in my body was telling me to run, but I didn't run. I stayed up until the point that I thought, well, if I don't go now, maybe I'll never have the opportunity to go. So it took a lot for me to leave. And when I did, my eyes started to see clearly that I had allowed certain things to happen to me. And that is a really tough pill to swallow. When I realised how low was my self-esteem to allow certain things to happen to me, that changed everything. That changed the course of my life, because all of a sudden I wasn't a victim anymore. I was part of it, and I accepted responsibility. There was no blaming. There was no blaming my upbringing. There was no blaming the dads that have come and gone. There was no blaming my mother, my childhood, whatever. Now it was accountability, and that was the thing that saved me. It was knowing that I was responsible for allowing certain things to happen. I wasn't blaming myself at this point. Well, I kind of was, to be honest. I had to work through that. But fundamentally, the most important part was this acceptance of my role in it and what I needed to do to never allow that to happen again. And ultimately, this actually gave me control over my future and over my life, because I saw it as something that I could change, that I had everything that I needed inside of me to make the changes. I just needed to learn the skills, reframe some thoughts, change patterns and behaviours. There was some work that I needed to do, but I was ready. When you are not sleeping, when you are anxious, when your heart is going and you can't stop it, when you feel in a constant state of fight or flight, you really realise that something has to change. And that was a big moment for me. So something did change. I became obsessed with learning about confidence and raising your self-esteem and how to become the best version of myself, how to become more present, how to reduce fear, how to own my voice, own my boundaries. I became obsessed with mindset. And whilst I was on this journey, I started to notice things changed. The way that I saw the world changed. No longer a victim, I was a warrior. I was someone who could create change. I was a change maker. No longer would I cover up my insecurities, but I would open myself up to them. I would reveal my insecurities, because it was only through accepting what I was insecure about that I would be able to change it. And I knew that. I knew I needed to change it. So the first book that I read was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And it was an incredible book, and it taught me how to be present. And shockingly, I don't think I knew how to be present. I struggled to meditate. I struggled to live in the moment. I was always that hamster on the wheel chasing the next thing because I was so scared of my past. I didn't want my future to be like my past. And the more I focused on my past, the more I ran away from it, the more that it created this sense of fear, this sense of anxiety. And the more I probably brought it to me, I promised myself I would never be an abuse victim or I would never be in an abusive relationship. And it came straight to me because of my insecurities from the past, because I let my past dictate my worth, because I let other people dictate my worth. One of the quotes from The Power of Now that stayed with me was, "You cannot find yourself by going into the past. You can only find yourself by coming into the present." And that forced me to start really working on how I could be in the present moment. It really did play with my mental health, running from the past and using pain as my motivator. When I say that, I mean not wanting to have that horrible upbringing in my future. Not saying that it was awful because of my mum. I'm just saying that circumstances and being very poor made it very, very difficult. And that created a trauma that I was scared of happening again, and I was doing everything I thought I could to run away from that, but I actually was running towards it because it was where I was focused. All my energy was focused on that trauma. That's where my healing began, and it wasn't easy. Meditation felt hard, and I got frustrated, and I got scared, and I slipped back occasionally into the drinks, into the distractions. But I knew that if I didn't change now, in 10 years' time, I would look back on my life and I would be so disheartened, and I couldn't risk that. And no other person deserves that sort of power over me. Because if you think about it, insecurities come from judgment from others, or perceived judgment of others, judgment of yourself. I wasn't going to let anyone's judgment affect my future anymore, and I needed to take the power back. And so my journey began. So, like I said, I got obsessed with mindset. I got obsessed with researching about the brain. I got my own coach. I did my coaching certification. I became an NLP Master Practitioner. And as I started doing all of this work, I just started noticing that things started transforming, especially to do with my self-image, because I had such there were parameters around my self-image in terms of what I thought was possible for me due to my upbringing, due to the way I looked, etc., whatever it was. As I started dismantling those parameters and breaking them down, new possibilities opened for me. I started focusing on who I wanted to be and what I wanted to create, not on who I was and why I couldn't and why no one would listen to me. And with that, my whole life shifted. I became a life coach. I became an author. I bought my own house. I found a loving relationship, fiance, and everything shifted in the space of 6 years. It cannot be a coincidence, and I don't believe it's a coincidence that I started doing all of this work, and 6 years later I'm here where I am talking to you on a podcast, which I would have never been able to do back then. I'd been far too scared, and don't get me wrong, I'm scared now, but the message is more important than my fear, and the desire is more important than my limitations, my self-made limitations of what I think or believe is possible for me. So I'm here and I'm doing it with you, and I want you to know that if I could do it, if I could get from the bottom of a pit where I wasn't sleeping, I was barely eating, I was drinking, I was distracting, I came from no money, we didn't have anything, if I can get through all of that and get to this place now where I'm talking to you so openly about my vulnerabilities and my insecurities, and I am so open for whatever comes my way in terms of the future, I get quite emotional just thinking about it, then you can too. And this podcast is about that. It's about the skills, the techniques, the ways that you can live your life optimally so it doesn't necessarily always feel like you're suffering. Pain is inevitable in this world, but suffering is not. And I learned that the hard way. I had to get rock bottom before I made the changes. Now, do I regret that? No, that relationship in a weird way actually saved me. Do I want anyone to go through that? No, which is why I'm doing this podcast right now, so that you can take the reins on your own life, so that you can take control of your future by growing in confidence through conversations, by becoming the best version of yourself, so that you can achieve anything you want. The way that we live in this world is that we're constantly met with rejections and hardships and challenges and obstacles, and the more pain and the more rejection we experience, the more we'll feel that it's not possible for us moving forward. But it's simply not true. We cannot let our past dictate our future, and we cannot let our past dictate our hope and our ideas of possibility and the desires and the dreams that we have for ourselves in this world and for others. So I'm with you today on this podcast, embracing the next however many years or weeks or months that I do this, trying to be brave and encouraging you to be brave too, because this podcast is all about growing through conversations. And I'm your host, Michaela Longden. Next time, we will have a guest, and I will be speaking to them about how they grew confident and how they approached their brave beginning. Thank you so much.